I kind of don't really have any quiet time until night. I'm also a night owl, it makes sense, but whatever. So, yeah, Melancholia was inspired by pretty much a really, you know, a heartbreak. And if you read Melancholia, the actual webtoon that I did, the Melancholia section, the memory, it's about this girl who is she's just full of self-loathing, and she's depressed, and her father kind of is very abusive, and there's this person that kind of becomes somewhat of like a crutch for her, and she kind of confides in him, and then he's really sweet, and it's all kind of like young love type thing, and she kind of like somewhat sees something kind of light in this person, and then, tragically he dies, and she's kind of left, and the entire time she's battling this like darkness in her, this shadow that she just can't accept. And so it's kind of like it's all the self-loathing and everything she hates about herself just kind of personified in shadow. So neither of them had names at first, only Shadow did because she's the shadow side of her. But Petal and Shadow didn't have names at first. No one did. And the dude doesn't have a name either because, but yeah. And then in Melancholia, she ends up kind of like in her grief, and she ends up in this dream state where she wakes up and she's in the Melancholia. And that kind of relates back to the poetry, because the way the poetry is, the back of the book, if you actually like look at the description of it, it's kind of like a poem about what the Melancholia is, and it's basically like, the place you go to when you're grieving. And so she kind of went there in her mind. It's like a dream. That's where the dream actually starts. There were people saying that they didn't really understand what was happening in that part, because she goes from like fighting with her dad to suddenly being in this really like strange place where nothing makes sense. And yeah. And the Melancholia itself is like, I wanted to kind of create it as if it were like a physical manifestation of the feelings that she had inside herself. So kind of like with the wildfire and her trying to go through the lake, and like her falling and then losing the ring, like it was all really symbolic to her grief and what she was going through in that moment. And so it's kind of like when losing the ring was part of her being like letting go of something but not wanting to let go of it. So it's kind of like when something's taken from you and you don't have any control over it, and you try desperately to hold on to it, but it just keeps floating further away. It's kind of like that kind of thing. So that's what she was going through, and in the Melancholia, until she had to go through all that. And then at one point, when I think it was wildfire, I'm not sure, when all the raven, when the raven was dead, the raven was dead, and she like, and these ravens were always with her throughout the entire time since she got there, and they were kind of guiding her to the place where she was trying to get to, which was she was trying to get back to the guy that died. Because she didn't believe he was dead. She thought that he was lost somewhere and that she would find him, and I kind of wanted to make it seem like she would for the people who were reading it. So but like in the end, she towards the end of Melancholia, she started feeling like maybe it was all for nothing. Like maybe he's not even gonna be there. And it was kind of like, and then when she does get there, she sees like the grave, and she realizes he actually is gone, like the lilies. And that's why I chose the lilies, because like, the lily is the funeral flower. And Melancholia is about grief. So she kind of was able to let go of the idea of him and let go of him just in general. And so in a way it healed her, but there was still a divide in her. So although she didn't have like those, she still kind of did like those feelings of self-hate, because she was still sad. And both Shadow and her both kind of fell in love with this guy. So it was kind of like her Shadow and herself both loved him, and he was gone. And so her whole thing in having to learn to love herself. And so in that moment, she kind of goes, and she sees this rose, and the rose is what opens the gate to Hysteria. So, and then in Heart of Glass, that's the final chapter of Melancholia, where she sees what she's done to herself all this time, and it's this glass heart that she has that's taken so much beating and been so, like, she kind of somewhat has an idea of like what she's feeling, and then the physical kind of like how the setting was started to manifest in her, and she starts bleeding and she starts like being in pain, and then she just like passes out. And I feel like I could do that better now, because the way I drew it before, it wasn't that great. My favorite picture in that one was definitely the freaking awesome bleeding, like bloody rose heart thing, the heart of glass. And so it's kind of like she realized what she had been doing to herself all this time, but it was too late. It's almost like she had a heart attack or something. It's almost like she she couldn't take all the pain that she put herself through, and so she like faints. And then when she wakes up, she's in this cave, and it's the same cave that where she saw it, but the heart is gone. Like the heart has shattered. And then she goes to she tries to leave, but she gets sucked into something, and it's literally like she can't, and she becomes one with the roses. Like the roses kind of take over. And then like when she realizes where she is, like she doesn't realize where she is at first. And that moment, it's kind of like, I wanted it to be that you don't know if she's Shadow or if she's Petal. You don't know which one she is. She still doesn't have a name to this point. I mean, Shadow does, but not Petal. So the one that wakes up, you don't know if it's her or Shadow. And I kind of wanted it to be that way, because Shadow is kind of like, I mean, I guess I kind of wanted Shadow to be like a yandere. Minus the dere. But anyway, she's kind of like a character that is extremely, she's like the personification of hate itself. And it's because she is pretty much the symbol of what your shadow becomes, like your self-hate, and everything you hide and everything you don't want people to see is what the shadow is. So that's what Shadow is for her. So yeah. As for the actual story of Melancholia, as for the actual story, right? That's what people probably don't care about, but I'll tell you anyway. The real story is that I just had a heartbreak. This dude broke up with me and I was sad. And it felt like, when heartbreak feels like grieving someone, but they're not dead, just the version of them that loves you is dead in a way. So the first poem that I wrote in Melancholia was grief. And it's kind of like the idea of, like, no matter kind of part of that poem, I'm not going to recite it exactly. You have to buy the book to see that one. But part of the idea of that was, like, the person that, like, loved you before they broke your heart, basically, that person will always love you. And whoever they become after isn't the same person anyway. So it's kind of like grieving the death of someone who never died is really what inspired Melancholia for me. So, and then Hysteria, and I started writing Melancholia, Hysteria, and Euphoria all at once. It was just divided between sad poems, kind of scary poems and happy poems. I started writing all of them around 2014 to 2015, around that time. But yeah, I did decide on each of them in 2015. So Hysteria was right where she goes through and deals with all her demons, and she deals with all the darkness and all the shadows that she has. And in this dream state, it's when she realizes that she's in a dream when Skye comes in. And I first came up with the conception of Skye actually started in Euphoria. So I wrote this poem called Euphoria, and it's basically, I wrote it for if there was like a male version of myself. So narcissistic, no, but like rather that, like, because in that time in my life I found it so easy to like love people that weren't me. You know, just in general, I found it so easy to love people that weren't me. And so, like, I wrote Euphoria with the idea that this person would be me, but a man. Like a man version of me. And that if I could love this male version of myself, then it would be easier to love myself. It was some kind of twisted thing. So Euphoria is actually kind of sad in that aspect, because it kind of, but then when I actually started doing more soul searching and stuff, I found things about myself that I could love, and it's pretty much everything now. So yeah, but anyway, that's more in Euphoria. Let's get back to Hysteria. So she realizes she's in this dream, because nothing makes sense, right? And she realizes she's in this dream, and we see Skye here, and I really was hesitant about bringing Skye in at first, but I'm glad I did, because it all makes sense later. But anyway, so they're both going through these shadows. Only Skye is unaware of what that place really is. He just thinks it's a dream. He just thinks it's a nightmare, like a recurring nightmare type thing, like a bad dream is what he thinks it is. But then when he sees her, then he's kind of like, what? This has never happened before. So in his dream, it's usually that he's in this bar, and then there's this like vampire looking version of himself, which is his shadow, but he doesn't know that. And with these shadows, the way I did it was that you send them away with love. It's kind of like you just tell them that you love them and you accept them, and then they kind of are set free. And it's kind of like, in a way, they become part of you again, and because you're able to love that part of yourself. So that's why the first one was addressing her eating disorder, and how she's like doesn't accept herself, and she thinks she's fat and ugly and all that beauty, the vanity part of it. And the first one she sees is like pretty much a zombie, and that's where it starts for her. So she kind of, her being able to make peace with that kind of helps her a lot. So that's where it started for her. And for him, it's this. He has kind of like his main shadow is that he has a codependency issue. He's very like codependent is what his problem is. So he starts in this place where this vampire is about to kill this girl, and he kills he kills his own shadow. So it's kind of like he kills part of himself, and it's like, why would you want to kill part of yourself, kind of thing. But he doesn't see it that way. He thinks it's like, oh, I'm saving this girl, like, you know, very surface level type stuff. So Petal comes in, and when she comes in and she's running from all these like crazy zombies that are chasing after her, he's just like, what? He's very confused, but he helps her because he has like this he has a moral compass. With Skye, the way I kind of designed this character was that he's very selfless, and he's very like, he's humble and he's selfless, but he's also protective, and that, you know, he gives so much and people don't deserve it, but he still gives. So he helps her even though there's no, like, he has no guarantee that she won't kill him, but he helps her anyway. It's that kind of thing. He has a very strong moral compass. And so he gives without expecting anything. He's a giver. He's a lover and a fighter, actually. He's both. But, you know, he has a very pure heart. And so, like, you know, so when she sees this guy, she's never seen him before. Some people thought that he was like the ex. No, he's not. The ex is dead. And then they meet in this dream. And this is the first time he's ever seen her. And it's kind of like so strange. And so he kind of has like, it's like it's a recurring dream, but he's never seen her before. Like, he's seen her shadow, and that's the version of her that's crying, but he's never seen her. And so the codependency goes back to the wine, because the bartender is like, it was called The Bartender, but he's a vampire, so if you read my poetry book, it makes sense why he's a vampire. But in Hysteria, it's because he has like this codependency kind of issue. You know, with vampires, they're addicted to blood. I mean, they're not addicted, they need it to survive, right? For him, it's kind of a similar thing. So, and it kind of makes sense in Euphoria when you actually read that one, that webtoon, that section of it. But yeah, so in Hysteria, right, so they find each other and then they help each other. And then she tells him that she's dealing with all these shadows, and he has no idea what she's talking about. And then they both kind of help each other get through the next part, which is the theater. And that's where, you know, his is a rotting skeleton, right? His is a skeleton. So it's like he's dealt with most of that shadow, because it's kind of like the way you deal with it in the real world, aside from the dream world. In the dream, it's like you're accepting them and saying, I love you, right? In the real world, you create something. Like, you write music, you draw a picture, stuff like that. You create something. You make a video, you know. You do something creative, and then that allows for you to heal. And then therefore you put it out there and other people can heal from it too. And it's just a cycle of healing and just all good vibes, right? So he already healed part of it unknowingly, unconsciously, but the part of it that was still there is the skeleton that still feels like he's all alone, and that's why he has that codependency problem. So she sends her shadow away. It's this girl that's trying to just forget everything. It's like in that grief still, when you're trying to forget, like you wish you could forget. It's like that kind of grief that she was going through. Kind of still lingering, and so this dancer is just running around just trying to forget, like distracting herself with other things so that she didn't have to deal with whatever was bothering her, really. And so, you know, shadow, whoever this person is, right? She sends this one away to a skeleton and then fades away, like she's gone. And she becomes part of her. And then, meanwhile, his skeleton is like still playing the piano and still playing this music, and he's distraught because she's gone. He doesn't know what to do. And then he thought to himself, was she ever really, really there? So it's like, it's very sad. So he ends up kind of telling him, like, I'm sorry, kind of thing. And it's kind of a different way of approaching it than Petal, because Petal was always saying that, like, you know, she was saying something similar, but his is more coming from guilt, and he never does say I love you to his shadow, but his shadow still understands him, and it's about having the same heart, you know. So that shadow, he ends up dissolving it, and it doesn't really, he heals that part of himself. So then in the next part, he wakes up because the whole theater, because it's kind of held together by their shadows, right? Every one of these pieces are held together by their shadows. And since both of their shadows were dealt with in the theater, the whole place started crumbling. It started falling apart. And it's kind of like that idea comes back in the end of Hysteria. So he ends up waking up because he's that person that he's like protective. He's very like, you know, he'll save the girl. He's not the knight in shining armor by any means, but he definitely he puts others before himself all the time. Others' needs before his own. So he protects her, and he gets hit with like the chandelier, like, or something, like a brick or something falls on him, and he's like waking up, and so he wakes up, and that's when we see little Guy. Because like what happens in the real world, he gets hit with a brick in the dream, and then in the real world the cat makes his mic fall down, and then you find out, oh, he's a singer. Like, that's what he does. He's like a musician, he's a performer type of person. And so he sees the cat and he's like, what are you doing? So it's kind of like a cutesy little moment. I wanted to have kind of like a lighter thing because that last one was really heavy. So after that, he goes back to sleep. After he takes care of the cat, he goes back to sleep, and then he wakes up in Hysteria again, and he sees her. And the dream continues. Because, like, I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I definitely have, where I fall asleep, and then I have a dream, and then I wake up, and I fall back asleep, and then the dream continues. So that's kind of like what happened with him. And towards the end of it all, he helps her get away. They're, like, helping each other, basically. And they both, like, outrun those crazy zombies that were chasing them. And then there's a part where the path divides, and they both have to go different ways. So, she goes one way and he goes the other, but they kind of go with the knowing that they'll see each other again. And then, so she leaves, and then she ends up kind of on the same road as she was in Melancholia, so she's kind of going back to where it all started. And then that's when we see her father, and she literally can't keep walking. And then, like, she's literally paralyzed in fear, because that's, like, where it all started. You know, the family is where it all starts, usually, for people. So she can't go in, and she's hearing him, like, yelling and being angry and all this stuff. And then she's, like, stopping herself, and then the one that helps her, because thus far, she's dealt with all the shadows, so Shadow is pretty much fully almost integrated into her, and so she's able to take over, and then she goes in as Shadow, so Shadow takes over. So that entire time we were Petal. We were with Petal the entire time that Hysteria was happening, right? And Shadow is the one that saves the inner child. So the last part of her, the truest, like, most pure part of her is the child. And so the child, who else loves Baby Yoda? Sorry. Anyway, so the most pure part of her, of all of us, is our inner child. And so she goes to help her inner child. So Shadow is the one that saves her, actually. It's not Petal. Because Petal actually becomes that child. And so Petal's consciousness transfers into the inner child, is basically what happened. And so she's, like, cowering in a corner, and that's when you realize that her father has been stuck in this hysteria all this time. And it kind of, like, from a spiritual standpoint, it kind of helps you realize, like, everyone has trauma and everyone is lonely, like, you know, is trying to survive, is what it comes down to. And they are surviving the only way they know how, with their trauma and all that. So kind of the way it went was that her father ends up killing his own inner child. So the shadow of the father, that the father had become, ended up taking over in the real world. So it's kind of like, if you're not able to make peace with your shadows, and they are successful in killing you in the dream world, then they take over in the real world. Is how I wanted to kind of communicate it. So her father's inner child protected her because that's the purest version of him, but her father himself in the real world became the shadow. So that's kind of what happened, because it's kind of like it goes back to that self-loathing. He thought that that's what he deserved, to be killed by his own shadow, kind of thing. But to him, it was kind of like protecting his child. So it made sense. And when people, it's like they're aware of the shadow, but they don't know how to deal with it. And Petal found the way to deal with it, and therefore she was able to heal herself completely. So then there's this part where they go to the water and they're at the beach, and that was like the happiest place for Petal. And then the Melancholia and the Hysteria, it all starts crumbling away. And in that moment, Petal transforms into a dove. And she's kind of scared at first, but Shadow is still with her. So it's kind of like Shadow was the last shadow to fully integrate into her, like to fully become part of her. And so she kind of tells her the ravens will lead the way for her. And the ravens are pretty much like the ones that have been there with her all that time, that guided her through the entire place. They're her spirit guides, kind of thing. And so, Shadow accepts that this is like the end of her, but not really, because she's part of Petal. It's the end of the self-loathing and the hate and all those darker emotions. And so she ends up kind of becoming, so Petal flies away, and then Shadow kind of decomposes in the water and lets go of everything. And then in the next part, it's Euphoria, and Petal is completely healed, and she's like an artist. She's thriving in her career, and she's like just happy. And then you realize like she did have a family with her all that time, but it's kind of like what you focus on grows. So in Melancholia, she wasn't really thinking about her mom and her brother. She was more focused on all the bad. And so and even the one thing that seemed good turned out to be bad in the end, right? So, but in the end, she's able to let go of all of that, and she's able to move on, and she gives her jacket to the donation center and all of those things. Like, she gets rid of them, and she's finally like let go of it. And then that allows space for Skye to come into her life, and that's like the twin flame thing. I don't know how many of you know about twin flames, but basically in this story, Skye and Petal met each other in a dream, and since she was healed, she doesn't remember him at all. She completely forgot who he was. And Skye also forgot who she was, but he remembers her. Like, he remembers her, but he doesn't know consciously who she actually is. And that brings us to Euphoria. I can't really say much about that because I don't have that out yet. But, yeah. It's kind of like she shows him a different way of looking at life. She's integrated her inner child back. She's kind of regained her, like, childlike outlook on life. And in that respect, she's able to kind of not take life so seriously, and he wants to be like her. It's very wholesome and cute. But, yeah. In Hysteria, the poetry book, it's all about the shadow. Like, it's all about healing the shadow and all that stuff. That's why most of it is really kind of jarring, I guess, and a little creepy and kind of scary. But yeah, and then Euphoria obviously is just finally being able to completely love yourself, like love oneself, and then also being able to extend that love to someone else. Yeah. And the reason it's called Polaris now is because Polaris is about, I plan on writing one more book called Polaris, and that one will kind of be about finding your North Star. It's about following wherever your soul leads you. So it's kind of like following the path that your soul wants to go on. That's why it's called Polaris, because your North Star, you look at the North Star and then you know where you are. It's kind of like that. So yeah, I'm writing one more book called Polaris, and that's why this next little section is called Polaris, because I wanted to do little episodes, shorts, and they're more from Skye's perspective. There's Petal too, but they're more from Skye's perspective because he's the one who still isn't healed, and he's still in the hysteria, and he's still dealing with his shadows. So yeah, I thought it would be nice to kind of have it from his perspective, and he's trying to follow his North Star, basically, and his North Star's Petal. But and all these little shorts are just gonna be like moments where that take place after the end, and the end hasn't happened yet. I'm gonna strip everything and redo it all. And that's what I wanted to tell you. That I'm just gonna take everything out and redraw everything and redo it all. Because I want to. But I am gonna record every kind of epic picture that I draw for each mini short. So, and we can have a little talky chit chat talk whenever I do. So yeah, that's what this video was. I just wanted to tell you my inner thoughts and kind of what each section of it was about. I can't really go much into Euphoria because that's the last part, and there's way spoilers that no one has seen. So yeah. But if you did like this video, give me a comment, subscribe to my channel, and press the bell, because apparently that's what they're all doing nowadays. And yeah, so the next update will be Valentine's Day. Roses and wine, my sweet Valentine. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do leave a comment and tell me who your favorite character is in Polaris, because that's what it's called now. It's Polaris, and all these little shorts are going to take place after the end, and they're all going to more or less be from Skye's perspective, because I really like Skye. He's really cute. I literally wrote Euphoria just thinking about the male version of me, what he would be like. I guess I wrote it thinking about my twin without actually knowing I was thinking about my twin. But anyway, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment, like, subscribe, press the bell, and yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.